Good afternoon. I am Tina Solis with the HCI Solution. I would like to thank you for joining us today for our Report Design Debugging Education session. As we go through the education session, please make sure to not put us on hold, as the on-hold music can cause disruption to the session for others. If you do drop off the call, you are more than welcome to dial back in. We are currently working on loading these sessions to our website, and you should be able to view them there by next week. Today's presenter is Dan Collins, our VP of Operations. Dan has been at the forefront of EHR development and customer care for over 21 years, while working at Meditech in various roles. Dan has led data service teams and supported all Meditech platforms. With that, I will turn the presentation over to Dan.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Today we're going to conduct a little training on report designer debugging. Some of the things we're going to cover today are going back to a less complex version of the report or rule that you're working on, limiting the report selection criteria to limit the number of records while troubleshooting, and using the rule debugger and examining local variables and examining records associated to the rule, and examining key variables, and using if statements with the debugger, and using diagnostic mode in the report itself. This is a pretty well-known computer science principle, the KISS design principle, keep it simple, stupid. And this has actually helped me out. Following this principle has helped me a lot in troubleshooting report designer reports, especially some of the more complex reports and rules. And oftentimes I find that if I'm stuck on an issue, I can't figure out why report designer is behaving the way it is, I'll go back to the basics and just go back to a less complex version of the report and start there and make sure that the simple version of the report is working, and then I'll continue to add more layers of complexity to find, where the problem lies. But it's a really good model to follow, and I stole this this cartoon from The Art of Programming. I think it highlights the principle pretty well. When you're working on troubleshooting reports, it's a lot more difficult to troubleshoot your reports when you're waiting for them to compile and they're printing out, dozens and dozens of pages of records. What helps a lot is to really limit your report output so that you're working with a smaller set of data so you can get to the real heart of the problem more quickly. You're not waiting for the report to compile and you're not sorting through pages and pages of information. So there's a report designer gives you a few different methods of doing that. One of them is just using the selection criteria, in your report, instead of maybe running a report for, a whole year's worth of data, maybe just run it for a single day or a single week or something. The other method that report designer gives you for limiting your output is the record limit field, which will show up in report designer when you run your report if you have saved your report in the draft status, and then you go to run your report, the draft version of your report, and you'll get prompted for this record limit field. And so that's just another way for you to say, if you're troubleshooting a problem, just display, the first 3 records or whatever will help you get to the issue more quickly. And they used to have this in Meditech's MPR report writer, but you would use like a Z record limit variable, and they definitely make it a lot easier for you in report designer. This screenshot shows you a report designer rule, and how to insert the debugger into a line on the rule. And we'll get into this more in a few minutes when we go into our live troubleshooting example. In order to use the debugger in Report Designer, and the debugger is a pretty powerful tool that's built into Report Designer that you'll find indispensable when you're trying to figure out why a report is not working or why it's not doing what you'd expect it to do. But in order to use the debugger, the rule that you're trying to debug must be in a draft version, must be saved in a draft version of the rule, and also the report must be saved in a draft version. And when you go to run the report, you must answer yes to run draft rules so that the draft rule will get executed, and the one that has your debugger in it. And you can notice this screenshot. This report that we're running here is the draft version. You can see that in the Windows title bar there. All right, so we're going to dive right into our live example. We've written a billing report at one of our customers' test systems. And this report is supposed to list off billing charges for a particular registration date range. But I'm going to tell you that I really did some damage to this report, and I really broke this report on purpose just so we have a good example of a report to troubleshoot with. So let me get into that now. All right, so this is the report, bar HCI debug v2. I'm gonna run this report just so you can see what it looks like. I'll show you the layout page first, and basically this report's just gonna list off a bunch of patients and all of their charges for a given registration date range. And we also have a section at the end of the report, a report trailer, and what this section is supposed to do, you can see it here, it says accounts with cardiac charges. It's supposed to list off patients that have specific cardiac charge procedure codes. So let's run this report and see what happens. Let's run it for the last 30 days. And you can see right off the bat, there's some problems with this report. You know, we have some rows that are printing here with the charge date, but no information on the charges. So we need to, that shouldn't be doing that. So we'll dive into the report and do some troubleshooting and see if we can figure out why that's happening. And I'm going to skip to the end of the report in that report trailer section where we're supposed to be listing off cardiac charges, and you can see there's nothing under this label here, and we're at the last page, page 11. So that's not working either. So we're going to dive into troubleshooting this report and see what's going on with it. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is save this report in a draft, save a draft version of this report. Because if you remember what I said earlier, that in order to insert and execute the report designer debugger, the report and the rule both need to be in a draft version. So we'll continue with the draft version of this report. I'm going to look at the detail region. The detail region is where we had those dates that we're listing with no charge information. I happen to have a rule here already, and this rule is the one that that sets up the list that is supposed to get displayed at the end of the report with cardiac charges. But even if I didn't have a rule already set up here, and I wanted to do some troubleshooting to try to figure out why some of that charge information was not displaying in the report, I might want to just create a rule here just for debugging purposes. So you can create a rule and use the debugger and try to see, okay, what values are getting set up in the rule. So we're going to go into the rule, and I'm going to go ahead and save this rule as draft so we can insert some debuggers. And you have to make sure to go in, and when you go and select the draft version. So I'm going to go in, and I think first what we'll do is we'll troubleshoot the issue of the cardiac charges not printing on the report, and then we'll go back and look at to see if we can determine why some of the charge information is not displaying on the report. So what this rule is supposed to do is each time the record that's associated to this rule is the bar account transactions record. So that means that this rule is going to get executed every time we hit one of those records. So basically, every time we hit a new patient transaction, this rule is going to get executed. So it's going to get executed for every patient that falls within the date range of the report. And then for that patient, it's going to go through every single one of the patient's transactions and get executed each time we go to a new transaction. So if you look at this rule, what we're doing here is we're checking to see if this transaction has this specific procedure code, which happens to be a cardiac charge. And if this transaction that we're on has that code number, then we're going to include this patient in the list. But we also have code here to check to see if the patient is already in the list or not. And if the patient is already in the list, then we're not going to add the patient to the list again. So the way that this works, and the way that lists work with the report designer, is that you can do this search function here. You can see this on line 3. So basically what this says is, in this list, this cardiac patient number lists, look for this account number. Look for the account number of the patient we're on in that list. And it'll save the position of that account number in the list if that account number is found in the list. So if the account number is not found in the list, then what's saved as list position is the length of the list. So if you have one person in the list, the length of the list is 1. If you found that account number in the list, you would find that account number in list position 0. So a way to check to see if that account number is in the list is if the position that's returned from the search does not equal the length of the list. So always in Report Designer, if you don't find your item in the list, then what's returned in the search is going to be the size of the list, because the search gets all the way to the end of the list without finding what you're looking for. Anybody have any questions about that? So anyway, that's basically what we're doing. We're searching through the list, and if we find the account number in that list, then don't include that account number, and don't include that account number because it's already in the list. If it doesn't exist, then we're going to add it. So I suspect that we're not getting to this point in the code, but in order to confirm that, we can insert a debugger here. We're going to highlight the line and click on the debug button, and you can see that inserts a little kind of like construction exclamation icon there to indicate, okay, we have a debugger on this on this line right here. So we're going to file that as draft, and we're going to run the report in draft mode for that same date range. And we have to answer yes to run draft rules so that we run that version of the rule with our debugger in it, and we're going to print it. And the report ran, and it completed. It's 11 pages again, but we never hit our debugger. So that right there tells us something. Let's go back into the rule. That tells us that we're never getting to this line of code. So we have to figure out why we're not getting to this line of code. So we want to insert a new debugger. Here, let's do this. We want to maybe insert a new debugger here to see why we're not getting to that point in the list. But if we insert a debugger here, the debugger is going to get launched for every single transaction, every charge transaction that we come across. We don't really care about all the transactions. The only transactions we really care about is this one, the one with this procedure code. So what I want to do is I want to insert a new line and insert my debugger in an if statement. So my debugger will only get executed if we hit that procedure code. So I'm going to write that code now. So I'm going to say if the procedure code, the transaction charge code, I'm going to pull up the field that we have, the fields that we have available to us in this rule, and say if the transaction charge code is equal to, and I'm going to use that number, 602.100.8011. I'm going to file that, save that. I'm going to create new expression within my if statement. And all I'm going to say is put some free text that says insert debugger here. I could write anything here. I could just write blah, 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 and it would have the same effect. I'm going to save that just as a temporary variable and end that if statement. And I just wrote that code just so I can stick a debugger within this if statement here so that I'm only going to hit that debugger if we get to a charge with that procedure code, and try to see what's going on here, why we might not be getting into this other code in this rule where our first debugger is. So I'm going to file this one as draft. I'm going to go back to the report selection screen. One thing to note is that when you're debugging reports, I never closed the window that I ran the report from, and you don't have to launch a new selection screen, a new version of the report, unless you make a change to the selection screen. So even though I made a change to that rule, I don't need to launch a new version of the report. I can leave this screen up with all the date ranges I had already and keep running it and running it. It will pick up the changes to the rule that we just made. So it's kind of a nice little feature to always have that up. I don't have to keep running the report again, typing in my date ranges again. So I'm going to go ahead and print that report again. I should be hitting, hopefully I'll be hitting that second debugger now. You can see the debugger popped up right in front of us. This is the report designer debugger. Sometimes it doesn't pop up right in front of you it doesn't go on top of all the other windows. Sometimes you'll find that the debugger will get launched, but you'll see it in your taskbar as like a flashing yellow icon, and you just have to, sometimes it pops up underneath another window and you just have to click on it in your taskbar and it'll pop up. But what this is telling us is the rule mnemonic. It's telling us the line number on the rule where the debugger was executed. And I know this rule is only 5 lines long, so or maybe 6 lines long now. That is the second debugger that we hit. And I know it says insert debugger here, so we know that's the second debugger we hit. This is the statement output value is the value of the expression that's returned on the line where you have the debugger inserted. And these are all the variables that are used in the rule. I'll explain these debug variables later. I set these up on the rule earlier, but we're not using them yet. We'll use them in a little while, and I'll show you what that's all about. But so I can see here that what all the variables are. And the variables that start with V, those are the keys for the record that is associated to the rule. If we go back to the rule, I pull up the draft version of the rule. And you can see a record here. That record is the record that's associated to the rule. And those V variables here are the keys that are associated to that record. So V0 is the first key in that record, and V1 is the second key in the bar transactions record. That can get out of whack if this record is defined automatically when you create the rule, and it's based on where in the report you create the rule. There's different areas in the report where you can create a rule, but if you move your rule around to different spots on the report, this can get out of whack. It could end up being where you move the rule to on the report the record in that area of the report doesn't match up with what you've previously defined on the rule. But that's just something to keep in mind. I've seen that problem happen before, and you will notice that when you look at the debugger, these variables may not be set up if the record gets out of whack. So right now when we're looking at the debugger, let's go find where our debugger went. I can see V0 and V1 are set up, and that looks like the bar account OID to me, and OID stands for object identifier, and they usually look like this. They'll start with alphanumeric character and then a number -B, and then it starts a date, and that date is the date that this record, this object was created, followed by some other, there might be a time in here, 0639, might have been 6:39 in the morning, but then the rest of the numbers are just random numbers, just to give this object a unique identifier. And that V1, if I look at the rule down here, that is my transaction number that I'm on. So it's just the first transaction for this patient. So the question is, why are we not getting into this first debugger when we should be, because we've hit this procedure code? Well, if we look at some of our variables, if we look at list length and list position, they don't have a value. They're both nil, which makes sense because this is the first patient we've come across with that charge procedure. So no entries have been added to our list here yet, our list of cardiac charges. So it makes sense that if we get the size of the list like we do here, we're getting the size. Series count just means give me the size of this list. Tell me how many items are in this list. Well, it's not going to be 0. There are 0 items in the list, but since this list doesn't have a value, list length is going to be nil. And list position will also be nil here if we try to search on it, a list with no value. So when we first come in here, list position is going to be nil. And is that equal to list length, which is also nil? So this value is always going to be nil when you first go in. You don't have a list created yet. So we're never going to get down to this point in the code for the first time we go in and find the first procedure code. So that's our problem right there. We just need to go in and add some code that says, if a list hasn't been created yet, then we know that we haven't added this patient to the list yet because the list doesn't exist yet. So we just need to add some code to check for that condition. We'll do that right now. With the report debugger, you can tell it to continue on with the report, but don't present me with any more debuggers. I can say continue on to the next debug, or I can just terminate the report. In this case, we're just going to terminate the report, and we're going to put our fix in here. So all we're going to do is edit this line to say list position is equal to list length, or variable list length does not have a value, does not exist. All right, that looks good. Let's file that, this draft. Let's run the report again. Oh, before I do that, let's, oh no, we'll leave our debugs in there. So you'll be able to see when we're finally getting into that first debugger. Okay. So I can see now this is line number 4. The rule statement's different, so I can see, oh, all right, we're finally getting into that first debugger, and then we'll continue on to the next debug, and you can see, oh, all right, now we're starting to add to the list here. Now we have a patient in the list. If you click on the magnifying glass over here, it just kind of gives you, it allows you to see really long variables, and this window will expand. So if you get a really long list, you have to click on that magnifying glass to view like the really long list. So this is a patient name. So I'm going to just continue on with the report without the debuggers to see what we get for an output. Oh, I meant to do this one. Continue rules without debug. And if I look at the last page of the report, oh, let's see. Am I on the right report? Yeah, it looks like it. Looks like we're still not getting list values here in the report, unless I just mistakenly terminated the report. Let me see. Let's run that again just to be sure, and we'll skip our debuggers. Continue rules without debug. Yep, still not getting it. So let's go. I told you this report was really broken, so let's go back in and do a little more troubleshooting. We did see we're joining those variables to the, we did see we got a name in there. We did see we were building that list, so why wasn't it getting a value? If we look on the main page where our variables are, you can see the problem right here. That name list variable is not set to external. What that means is that that variable gets cleared out at the end of this rule. All these variables do, unless they're set to external. What external means is that we want the value of this variable to exist outside of this rule. And that's what we want for these two lists here, the account number list and the name list, because we want to keep adding to those variables and be able to display them at the end of the report. So it's a common mistake to set up a variable that you meant to be external, but you forget to set the flag. So that's what happened there. Let's file that again and see what we're getting now. Run the report again. Oh, we'll continue without our debug. All right. So now getting a little bit closer. All right, I see only one patient on there, and I don't see her. I don't see Linda's account number, just her name. So there's still something going on here. Let's take another look at our rule. You could always remember to pull up the draft version of your rule. All right, so there's another issue here that's a common mistake, and it has to do with this statement right here. And we're missing a couple parentheses here. Because what's happening, and the reason why we're only displaying one patient in our list is because we're doing this, checking this list position, and is that equal to list length? And that's returning a value. So that may return a value. And then what the next thing we do is compare that value and we say, or list length, and we do that. And that's going to return a value. And then we're going to say, does not exist. And that's wrong. That's not what we meant to happen. We need some additional parentheses in there to separate some things, to help clarify our logic there. So I'm going to edit that. And I think when I add these parentheses, it'll be more clear as to what I'm talking about. So I want to go right in here and add parentheses right in here. Not edit, I want to do an insert. Oops, let me go back in and do edit. And right in here, I want to insert parentheses. And then I need another parenthesis here. So I'm going to insert another right parenthesis. And accept that, and then I'll explain it. So you can see this is separated so that we're just checking if the list length exists or not in these parentheses. We're separating that statement out so that list position is not equal to length. We test that, or we do this test here and get the value of this test. It makes a big difference. So let's file that, and we'll see what we get. All right. Continue without debug, go to the end of the report. Oh, something happened there. We're still not getting all of them. All right, let's go back in. there's another issue here I see. It'll be more clear if we look at it in the debugger. So let's run that. I'm going to pull up the debugger next to the code here. If you can see here that a account number is not defined here, but it should be. We're setting it up right here on this row. But the problem is account number here has the V1 variable defined, which is the second key in our transactions record. And we know that, but if we look at the main, we go back to the field section or the variable section of our rule, we can see V1 is supposed to be the transaction number. And V0 is the OID. So if we look at this, this doesn't look right. It's using the transaction number to get the account number. That's wrong. This should be V0. And you can see that here, the two variables. We want bar account number is not stored in the patient's transaction. It's stored in the main bar account record. So we'll fix that here. We're going to temporarily delete this line here. We have to do that in order to edit this field. So we're going to remove that line and go over to fields. You can see bar account number here. It just has the wrong key value variable defined here. See how it says the key name is OID? That should match the variable that's defined for the OID, and that happens to be V0. So we'll go back to the rule and insert that line again. Insert expression, compute, and we'll say field. Now you can see that all the fields that we're using in the report look correctly. They all have V0 as the first key. And that's what we want. So bar account number and save that as account num. Accept that. And that should work. We'll file that. Terminate that report, run it again. Oh, the report's still, oh, I forgot I have the debugger up. Let's go continue with that debug. Go to the end of the report. Ah, there we go. Finally, for the last month, we have these 3 patients with cardiac charges. That finally looks correct. We have a list of their account numbers and a list of their names. Finally, all right. Now what we want to do is try to figure out, okay, why are these blank rows displaying? So I know one of the fields that's not displaying is charge amount. So what I want to do is maybe set up some of those debug variables. We can't just use the debugger to look at fields, what fields are, what the value of certain fields are. So what we have to do is assign those field values to variables in order to see their values. So I'm going to do that for a few of these fields. So like the transaction amount, I want to know what that is. So I'll save that as debug-amount. And we'll do a couple of the others too. Just because we want to get more information on the particular transaction that we're on to see why certain fields are not displaying on the report. So charge code, and we'll save that as debug code. And then we'll do one more. transaction type, and we'll save that as debug type. And then here we can remove this debug now. We'll remove this one too. We don't need that anymore. But what I want to do is, again, I don't want to look at every charge. I only want to look at the ones that have a field that is not displaying a value. So again, I'm going to use an if statement for that. So I'm going to say if variable debug amount does not exist, then we're going to insert a debugger. Because we really want to focus in on, you know, a field that's supposed to have a value that does not, and insert and only execute the debugger there, because that's exactly where our problem is. So I'm just going to say insert debugger here. Again, doesn't really matter what I type in there. Save that as temp. And the if statement, insert the debugger. File that as draft. Run our report again. So this is kind of what I was explaining earlier. Sometimes the debugger doesn't pop up on the top of your screen, but I can see my taskbar. I can see the yellow flashing taskbar here. And that's where my debugger is. So I'm going to click on that. We took away all of our other debuggers, so we know that our debugger is only getting executed when there's no charge amount. So I can see here, okay, for this charge transaction, there's no charge amount, there's no procedure code, and I can see that the charge type is BCS. I could keep going, look at a couple more, look at the next debug. So these are all different kinds of transactions. But I know from knowing the billing application that charge transactions have a type of CHG. So that's where we've gone wrong here, is that we really on our report only want to include charge transactions, so transactions with the type of CHG. So I think if we do that, I'm not seeing any CHG transactions that don't have a value yet. So all we have to do is add a selection variable in our report to say only include transactions that have a CHG type. So let's do that. Let's terminate this. Let's go to our selection screen and add a new field. It's called bar count. Transaction, and what we want is transaction type. Transaction type equals. And we can make that a hidden field so that we're not going to make the user that runs the report type that in. We're just going to hard code that to be CHG. So we're only going to include transactions on this report whose type is CHG. And I think that should solve the problem. Let's save that as draft again. In this case, we are going to launch a new instance of the report. Since we changed the screen, even though the field is hidden, we did change the selection screen. So I'm going to close that out. We have to pull up our report again. Pull up the draft version, run that. Last 30 days. Make sure to run our draft rules. print that and notice, oops, get that. And notice now we don't have any blank lines, so we fixed that problem. All right, let me get back to the slide deck. So I think we fixed all the known problems with this report. Does anybody have any questions about that yet? All right, so these are all the things we've done with the report designer, rule debugger. We've examined local variables and external variables. We've examined and talked about the record that's associated to the rule. We've examined the key variables and how they're related to the records in the fields. And we've used the if statement, an if statement to insert a debugger so that we focus our debugger on specific record that we want to look at. And this slide kind of highlights what I was talking about before, that you always want to pay attention to what record is associated to the rule and take a look at those V0 and V1 variables, and those identify the keys to the record. And when you're using your debugger, you always want to make sure that those look okay and they look like the keys to the record that you're working with. If this record happened to have another key, the next one in the list would be V2 for the third key. So what I'm going to show you now quickly is the report designer diagnostic mode. And diagnostic mode is great if you're trying to troubleshoot a performance problem with your report, or your report is running slowly. You can use the diagnostic tool to tell you, okay, where's the slowness coming from? Let me go back to the report here. Oh, that's interesting. I think I pulled up the wrong version of the report here. Debug 2 is the one we're working with. Let me just double check that. Yep, that's the one. So diagnostic mode, the diagnostic mode of the report, the way you turn on diagnostic mode is, again, you have to be on the draft version of the report. You go to the general tab of the report and you add an attribute called diagnostic mode, and you just set that value to yes. And we'll save that in draft mode. Oops. Bar HCI. All right, we'll run the report now. We'll do T minus 365 to give us a larger range for the report, to give us some more statistics. So we're going to run the report, and this tool is going to, diagnostic mode is going to gather some statistics on how long it took things to run on the report. All right, so what this is telling us is that the report took 15 seconds to run, and then this is telling us that there was 1,470 detail records. In that portion of the report, took 6 seconds. And then going into and it tells you that that was 40% of the total time for the report. The rule itself, took, and I believe that, the rule is part of the detail section as well. So the rule itself, where we added all the code to add the cardiac charges to the list, and that took 6 seconds. So this kind of breaks down for each section of the report, if you're trying to make the report run faster, where's an area to look to make it run faster. If we look at this line here, there's a yellow eye icon there, meaning that's an import, where we're importing data from the server. So that only took 2 seconds. So if you were suspecting there was something going on with the system, a network issue or something, anytime you did an import, you would see that value would be much higher than it is there. There's another one here. We're importing, there's 2 imports we do. We're importing the bar transactions, and we're also importing reg account main to get the patient's registration date and name and account number and all that. And notice all these that we're going through, all these records, 1,400 records and tested. These numbers are much more dramatic if you run this report in live, where you have a lot more data. You get the statistics would be more meaningful there. We just have a small sample here and test. But I do want to show you something interesting here. If we just run the report for a single date range, let's see, what's a good date range? 10, 11, 17. So even though we were running it for 1 date range, it still took 4 seconds. But if you'll notice, even though we ran it for 1 date range, we still went through 2,300 records when building this index. When building the temporary sort index, what I can show you is that this report, I purposefully left out an index on this report, and you should always have an index. And that's, one of the key factors determining how quickly a report runs is selecting the proper index. And a great way to reduce the number of records that the report has to churn through is selecting the right index. And if I do a lookup here, Report Designer will automatically try to present me with the best matching index. It tries to match up the keys from the index with the selection variables that I already have defined on the report. And so you can see, all right, there's a facility registration date selection index that has the facility and the registration date on it. So now when I add this and save that index, it should only be going through that and patients that are registered on that 1 day instead of all 2,000 records that exist in the test system. So you can see before building this temporary index, it's only going through 358 records now instead of 2,000 and something. So that's a big difference using an index. It will help will really allow your reports to run faster. And still, it was only like, a difference between 4 seconds and 3 seconds. But in live, when there's thousands and thousands of accounts, it'll make a bigger difference. All right, let's get back to our slide deck. And this slide just highlights, when using diagnostic mode, you have to be in the draft version of the report, and you activate diagnostic mode by adding that diagnostic mode attribute to the general page of the report. And the screenshot just kind of shows you a little bit of what we just went over. That's pretty much it. We do have a question I see in the chat where we're asked if we're planning on sending folks the PowerPoint, and yes, we can do that. We can send out the PowerPoint to all of you that attended today, and we also do have this presentation itself already posted on our web page. It's the video of the last web training that we did on debugging, so it is posted on our web page already. Go to the hcisolution.com, and I believe we have a new section now for videos. If you go to customers in video library, some of these educational sessions that we've already done are posted here. Oh, we don't have debugging posted yet, but it will be posted shortly. But we'll also send out the slide deck. Does anybody else have any questions? Keep checking our website, the hcisolution.com/webinars. We'll continue to add additional education sessions. Thank you all for coming today. Tina, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add.
Thank you, Dan. Just as a reminder to check our website for when our sessions are loaded for viewing. If you have any reporting needs that need to be outsourced, we'd be more than happy to take that off your shoulders for you. We have an automated quote request form directly on our website where you can receive a no obligation quote within 24 hours. You can also contact us via email at sales@the8ci-solution for more information or discuss a specific request further. Again, thank you all for coming and have a wonderful day.